And we're live with our 220th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on X, formerly known as Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on X. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We're super excited today to have Erik with us from Include Security. We'll be doing introductions shortly once we kind of get through the normal introductions and the normal announcements. As far as courses and everything else that's going, we did find out that DEF CON has been postponed. The training's in Bellevue, if you have not heard. We're not quite sure when they are going to resurface. So if you are interested in Practical Secure Code Review, please reach out. We'll notify you when the next open course will be. Looks like there's a couple of different conferences early in the year, whether it's Cactus Con or back to Kernel Con. Both of those will be on the calendar for us. Maybe from a training perspective, we're talking to the organizers now. So we're not sure if there is going to be anything this fall. There still might be something in the fall-winter timeframe. Anyway, watch the Slack channel if you are looking for that. Otherwise, Ken and I will be at LastCon in a couple of weeks and would love to catch up if you will be there. I will also be at SaintCon, which is local to me here in Salt Lake City, and we'll be helping run the AppSec community there. So come get involved if you're listening and you want to talk. Yeah, Ken, am I forgetting anything else? Oh, you're going to also be at Global AppSec DC, correct?
Yeah. August, October 30th and 31st. Yeah, for sure. Yep. And just an update for the winners of our competition. I finally got everything together. So my lovely wife is actually going to mail everything out tomorrow, and then we'll get you some. I'll send emails with links, tracking links for all the stuff that we're sending. But besides that, yeah, and look for we got a blog post in the works with SecDem about that event. So there's more to come there, I think, but we'll keep the rest of that hush hush for now.
Yeah, it was an interesting. I mean, the SecDem platform's pretty interesting. Ken and I quite enjoyed digging into it. So check it out if you have not done it up to this point.
And just a reminder, we have no we don't take sponsorship from SecDem. We have no kind of like official partnership. All it is that Seth and I have tried to build that platform before, and he did it really, really well, and or they did it really, really well, and we really, really believe in it. So that kind of style of training. So anyways, all right, back to you, Seth. You want to do introductions or should I?
Sweet. Go for it, right? Like, yeah. Either way.
Sweet.
Go for it.
Oh, no. I thought you were going to. I'm going to put it on you, Seth.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, right? Apparently we're having miscommunications today. That's how it's going. Awesome. So with that, I would like to welcome Erik Cabetas from Include Security to the podcast today. Erik has been an active participant in Slack for a couple of years. I know we've talked about having you on the podcast multiple times, and I'm glad that it's finally come to fruition. That's probably more on us from a scheduling perspective than you, Erik, to be honest.
No worries.
To be quite honest. But yeah, we just we're super interested to talk to you, especially about like Include Security. I know you're based in New York, and how that got started. But yeah, like to kick it off, right? Welcome, and give us a little background about yourself and what how you came to be in security.
Sure. Long stories that I'll try and keep brief as possible.
That's okay. We only have an hour, Erik. So
Excellent. I guess I'll start with myself first. I got into computer security and just computers overall while I was in college. I went to the University of Florida for materials science, polymer engineering, and along the way, I had a couple of very serendipitous things happen. Like my Windows 95 computer got hacked. So I went to school in the 90s, went to college in the 90s. My computer got hacked, and I was just like, how did this happen? I don't understand how this happened. I don't understand anything about computers. So that was a huge part of my path to where I am today, because I just wanted to understand what was going on. In hindsight, it was super simple, super trivial. My roommate, who is not a good person, put a back orifice backdoor on there. So if everybody remembers BO2K put out by Cult of the Dead Cow, it was he basically installed that with a CD, double clicked it, ran it, and then just compromised my system. But it was a couple years until I realized that and had enough knowledge to actually know that. But long story short, wanted to figure out Windows, taught myself everything about Windows that I could, and then realized that there were operating systems, taught myself Linux, found Linux, did that, found programming, taught myself programming. C and Perl and shell scripts were kind of my first three back around 98, 99. And then just, searching for interesting things. I literally did the how to hack, like before Google, Alta Vista, how to hack, find a bunch of text files or T files as we call them, joined some IRCs and joined some groups and started getting into security research. One thing led to another, found a really great crew of folks. We played DEF CON CTF in 2003. We won that. And just kind of my career and everything progressed from there. And then at the same time as that was all unfolding on the professional side, I started getting positions like I worked on the Microsoft IIS 6 team, which was the first team at Microsoft to implement like a secure SDLC. So I worked there 2000 or 2001. I forgot when it was. But yeah, I was writing fuzzer tests for the SSL TLS3 stack
Nice.
back then. And yeah, have many roles. I've done a lot of consulting in my career. I've done some worked at a product company, Fortify Software, which is SAST. I was director of security, so I did blue team stuff and ran a security team for 3 years. So I've kind of pivoted around and done kind of some of the product side, the consulting side on the offense, and the defensive corporate side. I think that's kind of the main trifecta of the industry. There's many other angles like the government contracting and the academic side and all that, but and then IncludeSec, the story behind that is my last role. It was towards the end of 2010, and I was running a security team. One of the things that I did in 2010 was I did an RFP out to 12 different security consulting companies and just had kind of strict requirements because I knew what I was looking for. And I was just very disenchanted with the entire security consulting process. I was just like, man, everybody screws this up. Like the salespeople suck. The project management sucks. The consultants are mediocre. Why is everything on site and costs extra money? So that company was called theladders.com. It was kind of like an earlier version of LinkedIn for 100K and up jobs. That company was kind of winding up. Everybody was leaving and the company was kind of imploding. And I was just like, listen, I'm going to go start my own consultancy because I think I can do this offensive stuff better. And me personally, I just really love running offensive teams. So told my CEO, hey, I'm going to go start a company. He's like, we want to be your first client. And I thought, because I worked previously at Ernst & Young and did a lot of consulting for financial services, I thought we were going to cater primarily to the New York City financial services market, where I had connections at UBS, Goldman, Morgan, all these companies here in New York. But then, the startup I was at was like, hey, we'll hire you. And then a lot of people at the startup I was at all left around the same time to go to a bunch of other startups. A lot of them moved to the West Coast. So all of a sudden, I'm trying to sell into all these financial services as a one-person company at the time. All the financial services companies are telling me to go take a hike because I'm a one-person company. They don't want to talk to us. But all the startups that my friends are joining, they're like, yeah, we absolutely need your services. So Silicon Valley just kind of caught on. And ever since then, probably 80% of our clients are West Coast tech companies, even though our headquarters is in New York City. And
any more, does it really matter, right? Like where we're located, to your point, right? Like about going on site. But Yeah.
And that was something we wanted to do early on because I did a lot of high travel consulting, and it was really, really hard to maintain a high quality of life on a personal level. Just maintain relationships. I need to move apartments. Yeah, good luck. You're going to Minnesota, now you're going to Toronto, now you're going to LA. Like, move apartments
Yeah.
in between that. So Include Security from the start has been a no travel consulting company. So we started January 2011, or I should say a very low travel. So since 2011, in our entire company history, we've probably done less than 10 weeks of on-site.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? Like I know, well, Ken and I, obviously, like we were, when we first met, we were both at Fishnet, right, at the time. And yeah, some of the offensive stuff, especially, right? Like I remember having, 3-4 month blocks where I was on the road every single week, right? And I was just like, what are we doing here? And why do you need me to come sit in a conference room and not even talk to the client, right, Ken? Like
Yeah.
we've had that experience, so we could be like in the vicinity in case we needed to meet someone face to face, I guess. But the
Or
amount of cost that goes into that, right,
a
is
freezing
incredible.
cold server room. Have you ever been stuck
Yeah.
in that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh god. Yeah.
Yeah. So the industry's come a long ways. I mean, definitely, like, pandemic pushed that a lot for other people outside of the consulting space as well. But I mean, that's pretty impressive that you've done that since 2011. Like, I think about my own career, like I've been remote for years and years, but there has been those you've got to be a consultant and go on the road for months at a time, and that's just never fun, right? But personally though, like I do want to dig back a little bit into your career as well, right? Some of the stuff you did, like the fuzz testing, super interesting to me because I still don't see a lot of that done from a client perspective. I do have a couple clients that'll run that sort of thing. Obviously, like Microsoft is probably one of those places where that is more encouraged, right? And I know Ken, like GitHub was as well, like doing some more like heavy level security testing, fuzz testing. But where you saw that at Microsoft, like what has been your experience as you've moved into like consulting with startups and other places? Are you seeing that same level of testing? Is that what you're encouraging like your consultants to do from an offensive perspective? Just kind of connect those dots for me.
Sure. Yeah, happy to explain kind of, over the last 12 years, we've done work with over 325 clients and a lot of startups, but also mid-market and enterprise. So kind of seen a bit of what people large and small are interested in, and also what the industry kind of demands. But touching on the Microsoft point, I think somebody had just done the first talk ever about fuzzing that year. So it was kind of like on people's minds. So somebody on my team said, hey, we have the SSL stack, and maybe you can use this like fuzz technology concept to do something like that. And nothing was even released. I'm not even sure Spike from Immunity was even released
Was
then.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but basically it was a very, very rudimentary thing. I just basically did the equivalent of pipe dev random into a TCP stream, and it was very rudimentary.
Yeah, well, and that was going to be my question, right? Like, because if you were talking early 2000s, that was not like, I think about some of the fuzz tools and what exists nowadays, and that just there wasn't a lot available at that time. Even though okay, so now I'm dating myself. Like I'm going back to like academic papers, right? Remembering reading some of that from a QA testing perspective, like edge case testing, and I mean, which all falls in. So it was
Injection testing.
Yes, fault injection testing. Yep, all of that. Like, and then on top of that, like a test driven development types scenario where you're building those before you actually code. So what was your success like there at like how did it perform? What was the
I think it found like one bug because it was so rudimentary. All I did was like open the I think I just did like the SSL hello, and then like the next payload was just like a random thing after the first like SSL hello packet. So
Okay, cool.
that was not a very big thing. Nowadays we have obviously a lot more. There's tons of commercial frameworks. There's tons of open source frameworks. There's some proprietary frameworks. But I find that the companies that do it are quite often using libfuzzer. That's one of the biggest ones we see out there, and we do get requests for it. It's not. It doesn't come. The demand for fuzzing and that kind of coverage is not coming from your typical web application client or startups. It's just not coming from that sector. It's coming from people who work on system software. So we've got this year we did a project where one of our clients is making. They're a top 5 automobile manufacturer in the world. They're making a new operating system for their vehicles, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to fuzz every system call, every user land library call." And they had already started using libfuzzer and had a couple of these harnesses done as a proof of concept. That they needed to they needed us to come in and do the heavy lifting. Like, hey, here's a list of all of our system calls. Here's a list of all of our user land primary library calls. Can you look at them, spend a couple days to look at them, understand where our biggest attack surface areas are, and then it was a pretty big project. We had 3 or 4 people work on it for a couple months, and they basically helped us prioritize. We helped them and they helped us prioritize in that time frame. We had kind of like this certain time frame, as many fuzz cases as we can, and we found hundreds of crashes with that. So that was very effective. So modern fuzzing for system software can be very effective. It's just currently very time intensive because you have to go into the source code, you have to instrument this call, run this thing. I think AI is going to do a lot to push that forward. Instrumenting things and writing fuzzer harnesses is something that is not trivial, but is easy for AI to automate.
Well, you're absolutely right. Like actually, that was one of the talks at DEF CON. There was a talk on, using AI to instrument fuzzing against like common open source libraries, right? Like,
but I think that one
was and some of the other,
that one wasn't writing custom fuzzing harnesses, but it was was it the command line tool one?
No, here, I'll pull it up. I've got it
no worries.
somewhere. I'll pull it up. Right. But it was, I mean, it was something, well, what was it using? Dang. Now like I'm calling back to it, and it wasn't a command line one. He had actually written code that was pulling from, that was asking ChatGPT, or the LLMs to actually generate the fuzz case. And then if it ran successfully, then he would, and so it was like iteratively stepping through that process. Right.
It was kind of the payload generation was more AI driven. Got it.
Yep. That's more what it was, which is interesting, right? But to your point, right, like having Copilot or whatever write those is a lot. It's an easier task, but it's super time intensive from a consulting perspective to have to put somebody on that and pay them to actually do that sort of work. So, well, cool. So from there, right, like also the Fortify, like obviously Ken and I have our, love-hate relationship with SaaS tools. I'm not sure what your feeling there is on those, having worked on that, right? Like, so what was it that you did with Fortify?
Sure. So I was director of consulting, I believe was my position there. And I was in charge of the pre and post sales consultants on the East Coast in Europe. So basically they would parachute me in if there was like a tough customer they were trying to close a deal with, or if there was a key customer that was having problems with the product, they would parachute me in and I would solve all of their problems. So they send me down to Bank of America for 2 or 3 days. Bank of America is like, we don't like this product. Too many false positives. We don't like it. I drop in. I'm like, here's a bunch of advanced ways of using it, and let me tie it right into your workflow. Bam! All the false positives go away. Everything's nice and smooth, and now you're a happy customer. So I did a lot of that pre and post sales. And that ties into one of my biggest gripes with all of the commercial SaaS offerings, which is and this was something that I just to set the context, I loved working at Fortify Software. There's so many smart people there in the early years. The technology had so much potential. It was really, really cool to see them care about the customers and the overall improvement over time. To watch like the 2D data flow tracing happen and all that. It's beautiful. But the thing that bugs me about all SaaS software is this notion of we want to show as many results as possible on first scan. That drives developers insane. And I think the user experience around better first scan experience at every SaaS company is abysmal. And I just don't know why that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, it definitely taints the developer's view of the tools, right? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I still
Also,
struggle with it.
how much is it made for developers too? That's another question. Like if I'm a
Yeah.
developer, how usable is that immediate feedback you're giving me? That's always, I'm trying not to inject my own opinions here, but yes, that's also something that bothers me.
Absolutely. Like how tightly integrated is it into your workflow, right? Is it just you have to run a whole separate set of tools, or I have to use a UI that's separate from my usual UIs, or is it tightly integrated into my CI/CD, tightly integrated into my IDE workflow? These are all important questions, and I haven't used Fortify recently, but in the past, historically, there was like a separate UI, but then there were also IDE plugins, and there were separate build tools that you could drop into your CI/CD and all of that. And same thing with most of the other large SaaS companies. They try and do that to some degree, such that it ends up being like a bunch of compiler errors and warnings, kind of reaches you in that workflow.
I suspect that's probably true for a lot of us where we like haven't used these tools in a long time. Our experiences are based off of some of the last times we used it, which might be a little bit older, but I think that's an interesting data point too, is that if it's hard to get people to come back is what I'm trying to say. If you didn't leave them with a positive experience at first, it's hard to get them to come back and want to use your tool again. But I think what's interesting with Fortify and a bunch of the other ones is that they kind of had to adapt to that CI/CD kind of flow, that DevOps flow overnight. And I guess I don't really know now. Like, I know what they did initially to like, have some plugins for. Back then it was Jenkins, and now I'm sure it's a lot more. I'm sure Actions and things like that are more relevant. But have you all had any experience with like these tools in those more modern flows, say? And is it any better? Because like I said, I mean, I think the initial stuff was so rudimentary and like it wasn't really moving the needle. It was just, here's your scanner, but like in the CI/CD flow.
Yeah. So, these days, and I'll be honest, I haven't done kind of like implementing a SaaS tool in a while myself personally. So we kind of primarily on the SaaS side of things, we primarily use SemGrep for our workflow on the offensive consulting that we primarily do. And we really like that. We know it's not like, because we are more on the offensive consulting standpoint and not the I'm an integrated developer looking for tooling that matches my whole workflow. It doesn't matter to us as much, these important things that are key for a developer that has to use it in their workflow every day and be productive. So we use a lot of SemGrep, love SemGrep. Shout out to Isaac and Clint and all them. Yeah. But I have not implemented it in a workflow that requires all of that integration that you were talking about, like the advanced CI/CD stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I'm with you there, because like the last time that I really did that was early 2010s, right? Like, implemented across the board IDE, Software Security Center, like from a Fortify specific perspective. And like making it work for a large group is difficult, but yeah.
And a lot of these big companies, a lot of these big SaaS vendors, once they sell, so like Fortify sold to Hewlett Packard, and then there were a bunch of different divestitures and such. And I don't even know what company it is now, but all of these big companies, AppScan Source and all of these things, they get bought by larger conglomerates, and then the pace of innovation just slows to a crawl. It goes from full steam to like we're a turtle crawl going forward on innovation. So a lot of these cutting edge CI/CD things that the startups and the cutting edge companies need are slow to come by. I'd be surprised if they have support for even the top 4 CI/CD tools. And that's just a reality of small company or medium-sized company getting bought by a mega company that just wants to turn it into a revenue machine and less of an innovation machine that got them the reputation that they first had. But we all know that story.
Yep. Yeah, that's something that we've dealt with for sure, right? So I mean, but on the flip side of that, right? Like so to kind of leave the defensive side and move more into the offensive side, right? I know a lot of people are interested in that space, especially when it comes to application security and what it is, like tooling, like you mentioned, SemGrep, right? Like what are the other aspects of offensive security, like other tools or anything else that you could recommend if someone was looking to get into that space? How would you encourage them to do that?
Sure. So, include security, we primarily hack applications. That's that's the grand majority of the work that we do. We do a little bit left and right of that concept, like hacking CI/CD, cloud native in cloud environments, those types of things. And then the whole world that encompasses offensive application assurance activities, right? So we spoke about static analysis, we spoke about fuzzing. Those would fall into those categories. So it's a whole assurance. From my perspective, assurance in software is a spectrum, and there's and a lot of people want to think of it as a linear maturity model, and just like, oh, if you do this, you're at level 1. If you do that, you're level 2, and it's just like a perfectly linear model. And like OpenSAM and BSIM try and do some of this. But it's not a linear model. It's a bunch of different disparate activities that in totality equal improved assurance. So I think some sort of system that says, hey, if you're doing a manual code review, it's considered, this much effective in your total assurance. But then what kind of manual code review? Is it a junior person that's, from one of our competitors that has a bunch of junior people? Or is it like one of our senior people that's been doing this stuff for 20 years and have seen thousands of applications and have looked at tens of millions of lines of code? So those are 2 totally different levels. And a lot of these maturity models just say, has source been reviewed? Like checkbox, yes or no, right?
Yeah.
So they're just too naive in their thinking. And so for me, it's a gradient. Like, do you use SAST? Sure. How do you use it? Do you use it out of the box, or do you customize it? Do you know what you're doing? What do you do with the results? Do you triage them? If you do triage them, who's triaging them? Is it someone skilled, someone not skilled? Right? All these questions equal how much assurance you get from SAST. Same concept on fuzzing, same concept on code review, same concepts on manual manual dynamic HTTP testing if it's a web app. So yeah, there's levels to it, and overall, holistically, there's levels to it, and within each level, there's levels to it. So you can come to somebody and see like, hey, they're a junior consulting shop, and they say they do a great pen test, but really they had a person that's not very experienced take a quick look at the source code in a time box manner, and that is somehow being held in the same level of like regard as an expert team taking a look at the source code, writing some static analysis custom rules, and the outputs are completely different. And currently our industry is super immature, and we have no way of truthfully disambiguating the two. Most contractual obligations, compliance requirements, federal regulations just have large, bold statements like have a pen test. And I can give you a pen test for $2,000 that is completely useless. And unfortunately, in 2023, that is becoming the norm with the SMB space. So the startups in the SMB space, they don't care. And it is a bold statement, but this is what I'm seeing. They just don't care. The level of apathy that I've seen towards AppSec in small business in 2023 is the highest I've ever seen in my life. They're just like, listen, I know we could get an expert pen test from your team for 10 grand, and our app's really small, but I'm going to go take this $2,000 pen test by a couple teenagers through like this bug bounty platform that says that they're a pen testing platform, but they're really not. And I get it from the macroeconomics of it, like, or just not macroeconomics, but just the economics investment motivation, right? Why would I want to do this? What is it actually getting me? Do they really altruistically care about assurance and improving their software security, or are they just simply trying to get through the procurement process of their next customer? And the SMB space, it's a lot of that question. In the larger companies, the enterprise, it's a whole different level. They're beholden to possibly major federal regulator problems, class action lawsuit problems, and they have a whole different story and space. But I don't know. I'll stop there.
No, I'd say I actually agreed. I'd say like it's interesting too, because the ones that care the most about security are buying the products where I think it's hardest to innovate. And that's coming from a startup perspective where we can fluidly change directions and features and adapt to whatever people need, right? As like if a small business came in, right? But it is interesting that the people that do like actually have to care are the ones who are buying. Anyways, I just think that's really interesting because like you can't adapt well if you are, no offense to Fortify, but if you're a Fortify or a Checkmarks or a big vendor, it's not like you can just overnight like innovate magic, right? It's not how it works. You're a big ship. Anyways, I don't know where I'm going with that, but that just feels really interesting as a data point, what you said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it feels like we're kind of screwed at both ends, right? For lack of a better term, right? Like, so you've got the large organizations that, they have compliance, but they also have the money to spend. They want to secure things. They're pulling in tools that have been used for years and years because they've always been around, right? Like it's almost like they're the entrenched whatever in that space. But it may not necessarily get them what they want or what they're expecting. And then what Eric's is saying on the flip side is we've got SMBs and like people that are innovating and creating tech products, but all they're worried about is getting into some of those larger companies. Yeah. And so like we're not lining up. And I mean, this goes back, honestly, talk that I gave years ago, talking about even just like standardizing names for things and what that actually represents, right? Like one person's, web app penetration test is like I'm running a, burp scan and then like checking the results, right? And another's is I'm actually going in and I'm fuzzing like all of the different parameters in this and I'm checking it against multiple lists. Like the level of experience of the person doing the pen test goes into it. And that's why we see such a wide range of costs associated with it, everything from a couple grand to, tens of thousands of dollars because of the expertise and the experience of whoever it is that is conducting that test. I do find, I mean, Eric, I'd have to agree with you as far as like the apathy out there in the small business space and trying to push the products along. I go back just recently, right? Like dealing with a very specific vendor, like we found a bunch of stuff and they actually came back to us and had us retest with less experienced people because they wanted a different result that they could show to customers. Basically, that's what it boiled down to. Yeah. And I was like, I'm like, okay, so the security guy apologized to us at the same time. He's like, you guys did awesome. I love this, right? Like we're fixing all this stuff, but can you come back in and just do like a week, like short-term thing so we can get this executive summary that we can pass off to the sales people?
Right? It's a big problem. And your experience, Seth, in that story, I've faced many times in many different ways. The clients just, they sometimes, they can't directly ask for it, but they're just like, oh yeah, I know you scoped this out as a 6-week project, but can you just time box it to 1 week? I'm like, oh yeah, you got budget constraints? No, we don't really have budget constraints, but just time box it to 1 week. And you know what's going on here. They want the clean report that they share with their customers, and this is like a major industry problem. Like anyone in product security needs to know that this stuff regularly happens. Like it's just a thing. And I think the only way that this is going to go away is like having standard requirements. Like, hey, this is what a well-scoped pen test looks like. This is what a pen test looks like. To your point of the definitions of our industry and the taxonomy of our industry are just abysmal. And unfortunately, I have to say some of the industry organizations that we all know and love, like OWASP, are partially responsible for this. If you ever analyze OWASP projects, from project to project, they'll change terms. So even within OWASP projects, they'll change terms. Even if you look at first version of OWASP to the current version of OWASP, they never define any terms. So they actually sometimes subtly change the meaning of certain things in the OWASP top 10 from one version to the next without even addressing that has changed in meaning. So we have no standard for definitions of what is what in our industry. And because we don't even have that, we can't even reference things in contractual obligations and compliance and regulations. So it's just like, I think the term turtles all the way down. It's just like, it's just a bunch of things layered on top of each other that equals a mess. And
yeah, I mean, I can say when Seth and I were working at the last consultancy, we were like, literally it became like a question of like, what is a pen test? Because everybody seems to have a different opinion of what a pen test is.
Yeah.
I mean,
we really
couldn't get anyone to lock down.
Is it a white box? Is it a crystal box? Is it black box? I heard somebody say no box. I heard a no box pen test.
No box.
Yeah. Is it time box? What is time box? Is every assessment time box? Like these things have no common meaning at all in assessment consulting, and every company uses it different. And I could rant for hours on that topic, but
yeah,
I was just posting on LinkedIn yesterday. There was a British consultant that said like, how could it be possible that a vulnerability scan and a Nessus report is touted as a pen test? And I'm like, hey bro, it's our fault. We did this. We didn't define anything. We didn't define for the industry what any of these things are and what a proper definition is. And hence the compliance and regulator people who don't know anything, they have nothing to stand on. They have the only thing that they can reference is pen test execution standard, which is horrible. It's over 9 years old, hasn't been changed in 9 years. And even the first version of it was incomplete and unusable. And that's the only thing that really exists out there. Maybe you can reference OWASP top 10, but then people are not using that right. And the consultancies haven't done anything. The enterprise security teams, even the FANGs, all the big ones, nobody's tried to do anything. I saw last year or earlier this year, I think it was last year, Microsoft and Google pledged spending like $20 billion investing into security over the next 5 years. And I'm just like, hey, take $1 million of that and standardize this entire industry. Like that's all it would take.
Well, I definitely agree, right? Like I go back to, there's been attempts, right? Things like, ASVS, the pen testing, execution standard. But then I also look at compliance is not asking for it, right? Like you look at, like from a business perspective, like the auditors, we haven't taught them what they need to actually ask for. What ended up in PCI, OWASP top 10, just OWASP top 10. And it didn't even really reference it, like took the current version. And then they're like, well, maybe. And like DSS did a better job of some of that, of like, hey, you have to actually dig in and do these things, but it was only for things accepting cards. It wasn't. So there's all of this, just like, it's confusion, right? Like and I don't know where it actually gets solved without FANG or without somebody coming in and just putting the hammer down, or even, government actually requiring some of that. Because obviously, like, everyone's kind of got their niche of what they want to represent or where they get paid because they can do X, Y, and Z, right?
This would be the
So,
perfect project
yeah.
for there's a US governmental organization called CISA.
Mhm.
This would be the perfect project for them. CISA could solve this in 12 months. But they have to do it in the right way. So they have to go the corporate enterprise, they have to go the consultancies, and then the hard part is by doing design by committee across and making it too inclusive, right? Like, oh well, we want to include the people that don't know what they're doing on this, and like everyone needs to have a voice in this. OWASP ends up like that. You see
Yeah.
people in OWASP, like you're just like, that recommendation that you just made for the OWASP top 10 is horrible. Like, why are we even considering this? This person has not done this thing for too long. They haven't really holistically considered the ramifications of the things that they're recommending. So I would say, like, on the corporate side, on the consulting side, grab like top 25% organizations, make like a think tank, if you will, and just get it out there. CISA's got to be careful that it doesn't end up like in the OWASP chat on Slack this week. Somebody dropped a link to a new set of dynamic scanning scripts for Zap, and they're like, great, this is it's put out by CISA and it was made by a bunch of like Yale grad students. And I looked at the code and I was just like, this is horrible. This is false positive city. Like, nobody should ever use these scripts or these checks at all in any capacity. And they got to like put out the good stuff there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it always comes back to who are the resources that are actually doing it. I mean, it's the same thing as conducting the pen test, right? Like, who are the experienced people that are in the room that are having that discussion? Like, anytime NIST comes up with standards, right? The vetting that goes into even just people being on that on those committees to recommend things. Yeah, like without the experience, we're just never going to get there. That goes to your point about what the different scripts that you're seeing from OWASP there for Zap. But I just don't know if there is an industry push to do that, right? Even if CISA was to come around and do it, I know we see the confusion because we're dealing with companies on a daily basis. But who else is pushing for this, right?
There's no incentive to push. I mean, think about this. Like, if I can make up a term, if I can use a term and that term's fluid, and I can just make up whatever service or whatever product I'm gonna offer that meets that fluid term, which nobody can really define and say what it is I'm supposed to be accomplishing at the end, other than like if it's services and exec summary, that's something everybody kind of agrees upon. But on that, how you actually do the test, what the value is, I mean, that's how you scope it. All that stuff is like, you can do. I guess what I'm saying is, from a vendor perspective, which is where when money is involved, it comes down to vendors, and when it comes down to vendors, they have no incentive whatsoever to.
And what's the end result of all this, right? Like, we have all of these companies out there playing fast and loose with like what assurance activities they're doing to meet obligations, and they're hiring the junior company. They're doing the sketchier activities, the useless activities. A little bit of the blame does fall on the FANGs and the Fortune 500s and the FANGs, because these are the folks that set the standard for the industry, right? If Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Adobe got together and said, "Hey, you have to do at least this level of assurance, or we're just not going to buy your products," then it would change everything. And they do that a little bit onto some of these third-party programs that they have. Like, if you want to make an OAuth scoped application for Google, you have to get a pen test. But even that is just, it's rudimentary, and the people are gaming it, and they hired a bunch of companies that just don't do a good job of it. So yeah, and I see why they do that, and they're like, oh, everything in the name of scale. Like, why lower the entire industry? Why not bring the entire assessment and assurance industry higher? Why not just say, this is the standard, everyone's got to learn it, everyone's got to get good, train your people, and do well, as opposed to every pen test company's got a kid two months out of college, is just like, they're charging $350 an hour for that person, and you're like, how? right? How is this worth that? Because this person just learned how to hack web apps. They're just doing the most basic stuff. And yeah,
I've never seen anybody take a consultant who was an intern and turn them into a principal consultant in, what was it, 6 to 8 months, Seth?
Yeah.
Something like that. Never seen
Never seen that happen. Yeah.
dirty, nefarious consultancy owner do that before. Yeah, no, it's anyways, it's a real problem. I do like that comment about insurers. I want you guys to both know I don't know shit about cyber insurance. So I like that thought by Scott. I just don't know anything about cyber insurance whatsoever. Just to comment on whether or not that would actually change things.
That's a great angle, right? So Aon and all the top cyber insurance companies, they have a lot of say into this world.
Yes.
If Aon said, listen, here's the standard for application security, and you have to meet it, that would change the industry as well. So there's a lot of different parties, like CISA on the government side, like the FANGs, the Fortune 500s, OWASP, the insurers. Any of these parties can take a step forward and say, hey, let's make things better. But none are. And the steps that they're taking are incremental at best, useless at worst.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to move the needle. And I fully expect there to be some of that comes along, right? When I think about the cyber insurance industry, right? Like I'm sure it's been a cash cow for those large cyber, like the insurance companies, because how often have they had to pay out on those, right? Like, is there an incentive for them to actually push any standards there? Because, if a company is not doing like the regular housekeeping, they don't have to pay that out. They're just collecting the premiums, right? And so like at some level, it always comes back to cost, right? Like it comes back to a financial burden on someone for us to create those sorts of standards. And I just don't think we've met that threshold yet. That being said, something like just the MGM stuff that went on recently, right? I've heard that, they came out in their report on that, like the CEO or whatever basically said, well, we're going to be okay because cyber insurance is covering this, right? That is going to be, and honestly, like we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to get paid out there. That will change the needle, right? Or that's going to move the needle, I should say, right? That insurance company is now going to make sure, like, start writing that stuff into contracts on what actually needs to happen from a like, and I don't know if that was necessarily application security related. That was something else that happened, for that ransomware attack to occur. But okay, that's going to start changing the industry because there's a financial reward and a financial penalty there.
So the trend we're seeing in the ransomware space and the kind of like offensive crimeware crews is 5 years ago, phishing was still the number one way that they were getting in. But this year, now they're going back to the old school, like what external vulnerabilities do you have? So let me compromise some server assets that you have, some hosted assets that you have, and let me leverage that to eventually get into all of the things that I care about. So they're going back to the old techniques of just remote compromise through application level vulnerabilities. So commercial off-the-shelf software, free and open source software, you're hosting it, it's tied to your company, they're popping it. And that's the current way that they're doing it. Exception would be the MGM case. I believe that was social engineering, if I recall correctly. But the trend has changed to now it's going back to the application level stuff. And now that goes all back to the commercial vendors, right? Like when you have your SolarWinds type of folks, or just recently I saw a lovely throwback. I think it was WSFTP. I remember writing exploits for that 20 years ago. So, what are these folks doing for assurance activities? Like, was SolarWinds doing anything? Was WSFTP doing anything? If they were, what was it? Was it just a standard checkbox? Like, how much did they do to have a secure SDLC and a secure output of product? And the answer is probably going to be not much. And yeah, I think we're going through something that like kind of the auto industry went through, which was like, oh, hey, all of the glass that we use on our cars, the number one cause of injury from car accidents is you being impaled by the glass, not you hitting another car, but it's you being killed by the glass of your car. And then, whistleblowers, and over time, safety and government regulations. And now we have safety glass in every single car in the world. So it's gonna, and I heard a rumor. I was chatting with some DC policy folks. I heard a rumor that within the next 12 months that there's going to be an executive order related to software security coming down from the president of the United States. So if we don't regulate ourselves, if we don't stand up and stop letting all these consumers get hacked, then people start doing it and forcing our hand.
Yeah.
Which,
well, and I mean, at some level, that's what needs to occur, whether it needs to come from government or, financial insurance. I mean, there's quite a bit in the chat going, talking.
We know who's not a libertarian.
I
help me out.
I mean, if you can't solve it on your own, right? Like, yeah.
I want to show you this real quick. I don't see anywhere in this big apology where they tell me they lost my personal info about insurance. It's weird. They didn't say, hey, we solved all this through insurance. They said, we're going to do stuff. Interesting.
Yeah. Security is very important.
Security is
very important to us. There. Yeah. But, Caesars had that also happen to them. And they are, between MGM and Caesars, they own like 85% of the properties on the Vegas Strip.
Yep.
And they're the same company now. They merged, I think, in April. So I'll see you off strip.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, dude. Like that was.
Have fun at the Motel 6, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know what I expect from like a business built off of like what casinos are built off of, though. Like, should we really expect anything?
You think they would get risk?
More...
You think they would get probability risk?
They need to kick that back to the mathematicians, right? Like the guys that are programming that. Yeah. I don't know. Like it's an interesting problem to be in the middle of, right? Like, because I feel pulled in both directions as far as like we need those standards, but it's also right, like how much regulation do we really want to see? But then, it's also from a consulting perspective, Eric, like on our side, walking into some of these places and I'm like, really, this is the competition that beat us out, right? For years, because, all because they have an intern in the back that's, running some scripts and generating a report, and that's all the company wanted.
I want not to be that person that names competitors out, but I'll describe the scenario. I know one company that does offensive assessment consulting that they got their entire start by only using interns. Like their entire first company start was interns only, and then they eventually hired a full-time person that was decent. But like that's it. Their whole beginning of their company, and to this degree, still is just that junior talent. Now, I'm biased here because I really appreciate the work that offensive security consultants do to provide assurance. And our clients, people kind of know, if you use Include Security, you hear about security. Like we're one of a handful of expert teams in the US. And I didn't mention that earlier, but Include Security kind of is an all expert team. So the usual pyramid model of like, all the big consulting companies and the medium-sized ones, 60% juniors, 20% seniors, 20% expert is roughly the ratio that they target. We just got rid of the 60%. We just have seniors and experts. That's it. So I'm biased because I created this company because I was like, people will care about security. They will love to do work with like this level of talent. And I'm going to make it really valuable by not charging tons and tons for this. I'm going to have senior talent, not charge a ton for it. And it's going to be the perfect value proposition, right? To get businessy speak. But then you go out there and you bring it to market and, we've got over 325 clients, but I'm just like, why don't we have 10,000? And it's because People just don't care as much as you hope that they would care.
Yeah. Well, and it's the stuff, again, it goes back to the SMB, right? Like those small business, a lot of the products and, things that we use on a day-to-day basis, they probably don't care as much about security as they do that bottom line. And, being able to sell to whatever next client is there. And then the tech that they're using a lot of times is a decade out of date, right? If not longer, right?
And then I saw another trend that was that I found interesting, which was the return to black box. So in the last couple years, clients have been like, well, why can't you just black box test it? I know you always do a source assisted test and you find lots of vulnerabilities, but why can't you black box test this? And it goes to that concept we mentioned earlier on this podcast, which was you want that clean report. You want actually less findings. But another thing that I think people are thinking of is, well, why don't you just do the equivalent of a bug bounty? We have a bug bounty and they don't have source code, so you should just do what they do. And we're like, bug bounty is a different beast. It's another defense in depth level of assurance. You have a lot of people that are usually really good at one thing. Like all I do is find SSRF, all I do is find auth bugs, and then you have a bunch of them try and find their one thing that they do, versus assessment consulting, which is I've got this small level of time and I need to find as many vulnerabilities as possible utilizing every tool at my disposal. So it is really a fundamentally different problem. And the reason why we don't do things the way that the bug bounty folks do is because we only have a short period of time and we want to use all the technology and capabilities that we have to find as many vulnerabilities as fast as possible. And that's, I think, how the entire industry should operate. Find as many vulns as fast as possible, provide as much assurance as much as possible. But we just don't have that currently across the industry.
Yeah. But I mean, again, like to circle back around, right? Like that comes down to this, like, what are the definitions of a pen test, of a black box assessment, of right? Like, every consultancy use is a slightly different. And I know I'm guilty of this too, right? Like, because I'm trying to explain. But to Ken's point as well, right? Like whenever we get on with a client, that's one of the first things I ask is like, what are you expecting? Because your understanding of what a penetration test is, of what a code review is, could be different than what we've been talking about for the last 10 years or, in the last hour. And, if I don't understand that, like I can set, and you can, Eric, like we can sell to what level you can support. But if you're not getting what you expect out of that, then you're not going to come back, right? So at some point you have to play business owner as well to actually keep things moving along.
I have two side stories on that. One, or quips, I should say. I have one client that they're a very large network appliance vendor, and they will not stop they will not stop calling what we do scans. Like they're just like, oh, when are you going to do the scan? I'm like, oh, you mean the thing where we manually penetration test your network appliance and then review all of the source code? That thing? Yeah, we're going to do that this quarter, right, for you. But they just won't stop calling it a scan. Like they just don't have this concept. They're just like, yeah, everything we do with security is a scan. And then I had another client. This is a newer client, and we were having that conversation of, the source assisted is going to get you the most findings, it's most comprehensive, it's most efficient. And they're like, okay, well, we'll give you the source, but don't do a code review. I'm like, well, what do you mean there? And they're like, well, we want you to use the source and be more efficient and do all the things that you just said, but we don't want you to review the source. And like, okay, break that down. And like, well, we don't want you to open the source and look at it top to bottom. And we just want you to use it in helping you find the vulnerabilities faster. I'm like, okay, sure. Call it whatever you want.
Yeah. Again, understanding, right? Like that's amazing. Yeah. That's awesome.
And it's because I have nowhere to point them. Like, okay, let's get on the same level here. Let's be on the same page. And go to AppSecTaxonomy.com, read that. We're on the same page. Seth's company, my company, all of our competitors, we're all on the same page. We all use the same thing.
Yep. And this is what it equates to. This is the level of effort. This is the standard, list of vulnerabilities, or the ASVS, whatever it is that we use, the verification standard, right? Like there's got to be some level. And I mean, and I think it will come, but I just don't think it'll come fast enough for us, right? It's and it never is. I mean, that's the way that it goes.
20 billion invested in security over the next 5 years. Just give me like 0.5% of that, and I could, the three of us, we could change the whole.
We could change it,
right? We could change it.
Exactly. Yep. Sweet. Well, I mean, that sounds like what there should be taxonomy at absoluteappsec.com or like in the whatever. Right. One more, right? What is that XKCD, right? Like create yet another standard that
everyone's got a standard. That's the great thing about standards. Everyone has one.
Everyone has one. Exactly. Sweet. Well, Erik, we have been talking for an hour. It's gone by very quickly from my perspective. But we really appreciate the time. I appreciate the conversation. We're going to have to do this again, especially as some of this stuff starts to evolve. It'd be really interesting to see what else CISA comes out with, what else we see in the industry. So yeah, we'll be in touch, or if something else pops up, let us know.
For sure. And if anyone needs me, I'm available for AppSec rants, for birthday parties, retirement parties, whatever you need me for.
Yes. That's good. You're friendly AppSec curmudgeon. I don't know. Like, how do you want to be represented?
I'll take that. But really, like, we all really want the industry to be better, right? We all want more secure and safer software. And like, my frustration and anything that I've said in the last hour is just because we're not getting there as fast as I would like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that's what we'd all like to see. Like, we'd like to see the needle moved along, so we're not fighting the same battles that we were 10 to 15 years ago, right? So at some point it will happen, but I'm trying to be like glass half full a little bit, right? Like there are good things that are happening in different places. It's just that the overarching speed it's just a little too slow for my taste, but yep.
Yeah, like I will say, when I'm able to, I'd love to. There's so much of what you guys are discussing that I just really have to keep my mouth shut on for some things, which I don't love, but that's the way it is right now. Yeah, I'd love to revisit this conversation. Me. Yeah,
if I ever was not working at Include Security and running the company, I would just start a appsekrants.com blog and just go off and just hold the industry to task, hold individuals to task. There's so much stuff that we could be doing better as our industry. But
so we need to get you, Erik, bought out so that you can be free.
Exactly.
To say what you. No. I think the reality is that I would like to share with people what the journey is like to try and innovate in this space from a product perspective, because a lot of things you guys touch on is like from everything from like terms to how you represent to people understanding what you're trying to like send out there to like some of the data points we've used, SAST as a good example, not being quite what we need and not being comprehensive enough to really contextualize things and all this stuff that's going on. I can't really speak to all of it, but when I can, I'd love to share like why there are some of those, like what I experienced anyways in those areas. So we should do a follow-up. That's my way of saying we should do a follow-up, but I'd love to do that follow-up too, about this specific conversation, once we're at that point.
Sure. Cool. And if anybody sees me in the Absolute AppSec chat, DM me, happy to talk further, or in the public chat. And yeah, if there's any aspects of this conversation that we should do a whole episode on, happy to talk later this year or next year or whenever.
Sweet. Yep. Yeah. We'll keep it in mind, and we'll get you on the list there, Erik, for coming back on. We'll talk with Aaron and make sure that happens. I'll be waiting for your like rainforest puppy style rant and mic drop as you walk out of the industry, but we'll see. Let me know when you get there, so we can have the front row seat. Okay. All right. I think that's everything for today. Thanks again for the conversation, Erik. Any other places that people could find you at? Like you going to any conferences or anything like that?
So I definitely do Black Hat DEF CON every year. All the I'm here in New York City, so all the local New York City conferences, besides NYC, HushCon NYC, and SummerCon, I go to all three of those every year. And then occasionally I'm at some private conferences like the Qualcomm Private Security Summit and Blue Hat and things like that.
Okay.
That's kind of my conference circuit. And then online, I personally don't really have an online presence, but the company's just Include Security, and we're at Include Security on most platforms,
Yep.
at Twitter, Reddit, whatever.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks again. And yeah, I think that's it for today. Ken, any final thoughts before we close it out?
I'll just thank you again, Eric. Apologies for the time it's taken to get this all set up. We just,
Oh, no worries.
we went through a long period where we actually didn't schedule anyone. But in any case, thank you so much. Really do appreciate your time and value your opinions and your experiences as well. So thank you. And also the same for everybody else on listening. Thank you for participating and chiming in or tuning in.
Yes. And join us on Slack if you're not already there. You can ask Eric or us, either of us, questions. And otherwise, we'll see everyone online. We'll see you all in a week or so.
Take care, folks.